What is love and what's love got to do with it? Those are two songs that we probably all know, but I want to talk about it because love is in the air. We just had Valentine's Day and it's coming up on a lot of podcasts, it's coming up on a lot of topics. And a friend of mine posted about it, Facebook friend of mine posted about it earlier today. So I figured it's time for me to do a little take on love. So I want to kind of go into the history of love real quick and then talk about some of the modern podcasts and things that I've heard talking about it at the end of this little audio that I'm doing. So, contrary to popular belief, people didn't really talk about love in ancient days that we can tell. Of course, they talked about passion, which can be a type of love, but a lot of times when people are talking about love, they're not exactly talking about passion. So, in ancient days, it was more about fertility, and you had many different goddesses and gods related to that. Probably the most famous that most people would know was the festival of Lupercalia, that kind of really came to its head in the 6th century BC. And this was definitely a big fertility celebration held around February 14th, which is where we got our modern day Valentine's Day from. And I'm going to go into another thing that led to us having a modern day Valentine's, where the name came from. So then, if you fast forward a little bit to the 3rd century BC, you'll find that a lot of leaders, a lot of men in power didn't like the idea of marriage, because a lot of people have this idea that marriage was always, lauded and seen as a great thing for family and a great thing for society and community. Not so much. In ancient times in villages, people didn't necessarily get married in the way that we think of it. They had relationships, they had children, but children were seen as the responsibility of the community. So it really didn't matter who your father was, because the whole community was going to take care of that child. So you didn't have the idea of paternity or the idea of a patriarchy until we have colonization. And then under colonization, marriage was really for the elites. It was for the wealthy to pass down their inheritance, to pass down their land and their titles. And the poor weren't even supposed to get married. It was seen as a distraction. Relationships were seen as a distraction. Your duty was to survive, to produce goods and services, to be focused on getting your taxes paid, serving your country as a soldier or serving your country as, menial labor. So you having a family was not necessarily something that they were really concerned about. Um, and there was rampant grape. And so children were still going to be born whether people got married or not. So marriage was seen as an elite thing. It was not seen as something that the average person should even be worried about, and definitely not love. In fact, there were leaders that outlawed love, as we called it, because again, it was seen as something that made people crazy. Now, let's go with the Greeks for a while because they really studied love. All right. And they came up with 8 distinct types of love. We had eros, which is passion. That's where we get our word erotic from. Phileo, which is affection. All right. Brotherly love. That's where we get the name of the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia. Storge, which is familial love. Agape, which is unconditional love. Ludus, which is infatuation, which is really what we call modern day love, romance. That was ludus. Pragma, which is mature love. Now, very few people talk about pragma, but that's what I'm going to talk about at the end because I think that that's what we should be going for: the enduring love, the healthy love, the beneficial love, the love that actually looks out for your best interest, the love that is actually going to be the wind beneath your wings. But most times people aren't really talking about pragma, they're talking about ludus, the butterflies, the excitement, all of that. And they're talking about eros. And then let's go to the next love, number 7, philatia, which is self love. And then mania, which is obsession. That's where we get our word manic, or maniacal or maniac. All right. Obsessive love. That's those movies like Fatal Attraction and things like that. So the Greeks studied those 8 types of love. So now let's go back to the 3rd century BC. All right. And like I said, there were rulers making laws against love, and one of them basically outlawed soldiers getting married, period. And so there was a saint, Saint Valentine, might have heard of him. He did marriages in secret, and he used to have a big wedding, communal wedding on the 14th of February or in February. And because of that, he was actually arrested and he was martyred on the 14th. So when we actually celebrate Valentine's Day, we're actually celebrating the martyrdom of Saint Valentine, who was unalived for taking a stand and marrying soldiers against the rules of his emperor. So that's really what Valentine's is. That is how big a stand that some rulers took against love, how unpolitical and how destructive love was seen to be to the state. That's the stand that they took on it. Now let's go forward a little bit and let's talk about, like I said, these podcasts that I've seen recently. So I saw Corey Holcomb do an interview, and he talked about how, he loved when women fell in love with him, especially women who were kind of down on their luck and had low self-esteem and were really needy for affection, because he could just do whatever he wanted to them and they would stay. And that is manipulating love. And a lot of times when people talk about, we need to get back to those relationships like our grandma and our grandpa and the love where people stayed together no matter what, really that's what they're talking about. They're talking about a survival love, because a lot of people in the past, they didn't get married because of passion. They didn't get married because of infatuation. They didn't get married because of romance. They got married because of survival. And they couldn't make any other choices, especially women. And there are men out there even today who want to get back to that. They don't want women to be educated. They don't want women to have employment, credit, grants, loans, the ability to vote, any of those things, because they want to get back to that. Then I recently saw a podcast with Clifton Powell, and he was in a conversation with another man, Joseph, I don't know his last name. And Clifton Powell was saying that, oh my gosh, I'm 70 years old and I just learned how to love because my parents didn't know how to love and my grandparents didn't know how to love. And that's another toxic message that's out there, that women are supposed to be the ones to teach men how to love. And we're supposed to be patient with them and suffer with them and sacrifice with them because, oh my gosh, they just didn't learn how. They just don't know how. And they just don't have the skills. And we just got to, grin and bear it while they learn. And that's a bunch of BS, because everything that we learn to do, from walking to driving, you didn't know how to do when you got here. You didn't know how to brush your teeth. You didn't know how to put on deodorant. You didn't know how to shave. You didn't know how to do 98% of the things that you can do now. But what you did is put in the effort, the time, the money, the attention to learn it. And some people don't want to do that when it comes to, quote, love. They want to be given love because they think they're entitled to it, especially men from women. And society has told them that they're entitled to it. And Red Pill Society, Red Pill Manosphere is really pushing that message out right now. They're pushing out the message that truly loving a woman makes you weak, which is the message from way back in the day, like the emperor had. That's why he didn't want the soldiers to get married. And they're also pushing out the message that if you get a woman who's desperate enough, who her social capital isn't what she wants it to be, her SMV, her sexual market value isn't what she wants it to be, then you can take advantage of her. And you can use her love as a manipulation tool. You can humble her and make her needier and clingier and more insecure. And so again, when we talk about we need to go back to the love of the past, a lot of that love was manipulative. A lot of that love was deceiving and conniving. It was about getting women's labor. It was about getting women to serve. And we don't need to go back to that. We need to get to the pragmatic love, the love that said, okay, I see who you are. I see who I am. This is how we can meet in the middle. This is how we can negotiate. This is how both of our needs can be met. It is a very open-minded, logical love that requires communication, requires discipline, requires growth, requires skills, requires leadership, requires cooperation and not submission and domination. And this is what a lot of people aren't ready for when they talk about let's get back to love, because that's what we need to evolve to rather than go back to these other types of love. May you walk in Zenergy. What is